Life is a mercury dream, fluid, reflective, and constantly changing right before your eyes in a burst of silver light. Dive into these ever-shifting stories of the human heart and find your own reflection in our cinematic art. Hit subscribe now and follow the flow today.
The morning it happened, I was running late because of a spilled travel mug. That's the detail nobody talks about in stories like this. How ordinary everything is, right up until the moment it isn't. I'd been rushing around my kitchen trying to blot coffee off my scrubs, muttering to myself, when my daughter called from upstairs asking if she could wear her rain boots even though it wasn't raining. I said yes without thinking. I was already mentally at work, already sorting through the shift handoff notes in my head, already gone. Her name is Poppy. She's 7. She has a gap between her front teeth and she laughs like she's never been hurt by anything. I need you to hold on to that, because by the time I understood what was actually happening that day, what had been set in motion long before I walked into that hospital, the first thing I thought about was that gap in her teeth, and whether I would ever see it again. I've worked at Meredith Valley Medical Center for 11 years. 11 years of night shifts and short staffing and patients who hold your hand because you're the only person in the room. I'm a charge nurse on the oncology floor, which means I've sat with people at the worst moments of their lives so many times that I've stopped being afraid of hard conversations. I thought I was unshakable. I was wrong. My supervisor. I'll call him by his title because that's how I always thought of him, the director of clinical operations, had been at the hospital for longer than I had. He was the kind of administrator who remembered nurses' kids' names, who brought donuts on Friday mornings, who seemed genuinely bothered when budget cuts meant we couldn't give patients the extra blankets they asked for. I trusted him. That sounds naive now. It wasn't. The morning it happened, he called me into his office before my shift started. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he closed the door and then he stood behind his desk without sitting down, and he looked at me the way people look at you when they're trying to memorize your face. He slid an envelope across the desk. It was a plain white envelope, the kind you'd mail a birthday card in. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. Just my first name, no last name, no title. "Don't open it here," he said. His voice was completely level. "Take your lunch break off-site today. Go somewhere private, rate it. Do exactly what it says." I opened my mouth. "Please," he said. And something in that word, the weight of it, the way it came out like it cost him something, made me close my mouth and put the envelope in the pocket of my scrubs. He said one more thing before I left his office. He said, "You've always been the most careful person on this floor. That's why it has to be you." I didn't know what that meant. I told myself it was about a scheduling issue, a patient complaint, something administrative. I folded that explanation around myself like a blanket and walked out to start my shift. I didn't open the envelope at lunch. I told myself I was too busy, that I'd read it on my break at 2. At 2, I told myself I'd read it after rounds. By 4 o'clock, I still hadn't opened it, and I couldn't tell you why, except that some part of me already knew that whatever was in that envelope was going to change something, and I wasn't ready for things to change. I had Poppy to pick up at 5:15. I was always the one who picked her up. At 4:47, I was charting at the nurse's station when one of the hospital security officers came up behind me and asked, quietly, if I had a minute. He was new. I'd only seen him a few times, and he had the kind of face that doesn't give much away. He leaned down and said very softly, "Your supervisor asked me to tell you, read the envelope before you leave the building." I went to the family bathroom at the end of the hall. I locked the door. I took out the envelope. Inside there were 3 things: a folded sheet of paper, a key on a small ring with a plastic tag that had a storage unit number written on it in black marker, and a photograph. The photograph was of Poppy. She was standing on the sidewalk in front of her school. She was wearing her rain boots, the yellow ones, the ones she'd asked about that morning. She was holding her backpack straps with both hands the way she always does. She looked happy. She had no idea anyone was watching her. The photo had been taken that morning. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. I sat down on the floor of that bathroom. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just looked up, and the tile was against my back, and I was reading the folded sheet of paper with hands that had gone completely cold. The letter was short. He'd written it by hand. It said, "Someone knows you work here. They know about Poppy. They've been watching both of you for 3 weeks." I discovered this 2 days ago, and I've been trying to find another way out of this. There isn't one. The USB drive in the storage unit has everything: patient billing records, internal memos, names. It needs to reach a specific journalist before midnight tonight. Not by email, in person. I can't be the one to do it. My name is already flagged. The journalist's contact is in the drive. The storage facility closes at 9. The address is on the tag. I'm sorry to do this to you. You're the only one they haven't connected to this yet. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. The thing about shock is that it doesn't always feel the way people describe. There was no rushing sound in my ears. My vision didn't tunnel. I just sat there in the fluorescent light of that bathroom and felt something very quiet happen inside me, like a door that had always been open, slowly clicking shut. Somebody had photographed my daughter that morning. I stood up. I washed my hands because it was automatic, because I was a nurse and that's what you do, and I looked at my own face in the mirror for a moment. Then I walked back out to the nurse's station, finished my last chart note, told the oncoming charge nurse that I had a family situation and needed to leave on time, and I went to get my daughter. I picked her up at 5:15, like always. She ran toward me the way she does, pigtails unraveling, backpack bouncing, talking before she'd even reached me about something her friend had said at recess. I held her for a second longer than usual. She didn't notice. She just kept talking. I buckled her into her car seat and I drove. I didn't go home. I drove to my sister's house instead. She lives 12 minutes from the school. I hadn't called ahead. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She's always been able to read me. She just stepped aside to let us in. I knelt down and told Poppy that she was going to have a sleepover with her cousins tonight, which was the best possible news I could have given her. She shrieked with happiness and ran inside. I pulled my sister into the kitchen and I spoke very quietly. I said, "Don't let Poppy out of your sight. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't know. Don't tell anyone she's here." I watched my sister's expression move through confusion into something more serious. She grabbed my arm and asked what was happening. "I'll explain everything later," I said. "I promise. Right now I just need to know she's safe." My sister said, "She's safe." I believed her. I kissed Poppy goodbye. She barely looked up from the toys already scattered across the living room floor, and I got back in my car. The storage facility was on the east side of town, off a service road behind a strip of auto repair shops. I've driven past it 100 times without ever stopping. The kind of place that's just part of the landscape until suddenly it isn't. I found the unit. The key worked. Inside, there was a folding table, a battery-powered lantern, and a laptop. Nothing else. The laptop was already on, already open to a single folder on the desktop. Inside the folder, a USB drive icon, a document titled "Read First," and a contact file. I read the document first. What I found in it took me a long time to get through. Not because it was hard to read, but because of what it meant. The hospital had a pharmaceutical contract with a regional drug distributor. That contract had been in place for 6 years. What wasn't in any official documentation was the arrangement running underneath it, a billing scheme where the hospital was charging Medicare and Medicaid patients for medications at rates that were, in some cases, 3 and 4 times the actual cost, with the overcharge funneled through a shell company and split between a small group of administrators. The documentation in that folder included internal emails, spreadsheet comparisons between actual costs and billed amounts, and names. Senior names. People I'd seen in board meeting agendas. People whose photos were on the hospital's website under leadership. And one name I recognized because I'd seen it on internal memos for years, the chief financial officer. The person who had been signing off on this for 6 years while nurses on my floor fought for adequate staffing ratios and patients in the charity care program were quietly being billed for medications they'd been told were covered. I thought about the patients I'd sat with. The ones who'd asked me, carefully, apologetically, whether they'd be getting a bill for this. The ones who'd cried when I told them not to worry about it, that the hospital had programs, that they'd be taken care of. I sat in that storage unit for probably 4 minutes, just breathing. Then I picked up the phone. There was a burner phone beside the laptop I hadn't noticed at first, with one contact saved, and I called the number. She answered on the second ring. I'd heard of her. Her name was on the byline of a series about rural hospital consolidations that had run in a national outlet about 2 years back. She'd won something for it. I vaguely remembered seeing a headline. Her voice on the phone was calm and direct, like someone who'd done this before. I was told to expect this call, she said. Then you know why I'm calling. I know part of it. I need to verify what you have. I told her where I was. She said she could be there in 40 minutes. She asked me not to forward anything or copy anything until she arrived. She asked if I was safe. I said I thought so. She said, stay in the unit. Lock it from the inside if you can. I locked it from the inside. Those 40 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the glow of that laptop screen and I thought about the photograph of Poppy in her rain boots. I thought about my supervisor's face when he slid the envelope across the desk, the way he was memorizing me. I thought about the 11 years I'd spent on that floor, the patients, the night shifts, the way I'd always believed that the hospital, whatever its flaws, was ultimately on the side of the people who needed it. I thought about the moment I would have to explain to Poppy, someday, why there were nights I didn't come home, and why we moved to my sister's house for a while, and why Mommy's name was in the news. I wasn't afraid, exactly. What I felt was more like clarity, the kind that comes when there's only one possible path forward and all the other options have collapsed away. The journalist arrived in 38 minutes. She knocked with a specific pattern. 3, pause, 2, the way the document had said she would. I opened the door. She was younger than I expected. She had a laptop bag over her shoulder and glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked at me for a moment with an expression I can only describe as recognition, like she'd been waiting for someone to show up with exactly this for a long time. We sat together at that folding table for 2 hours. She went through the documentation methodically, asking questions, pulling up public records on her phone to cross-reference addresses and company names. I answered what I could. I told her about the patients. I told her about the charity care program. I told her about the years of short staffing while the administration was apparently funneling money through a shell company in Delaware. At one point, she stopped typing and looked at me and said, "Why did he choose you?" I thought about what my supervisor had written. "You've always been the most careful person on this floor." "Because I document everything," I said. 11 years of incident reports, patient advocacy notes, internal complaints about billing irregularities that I filed and nobody ever followed up on. I paused. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just thought I was doing my job. She looked back at her screen. "You basically built the supporting record without knowing it." I hadn't thought of it that way. But she was right. My signature was on years of documentation that corroborated what was in that folder. I was the corroborating witness. That's why it had to be me in person. Not to press a button. To stand behind the record I'd already created without knowing I was creating it. To put my face and my name and my 11 years on it. She sent the first files to her editor at 9:47 p.m. She submitted the full package at 11:12. She drove me to my sister's house afterward. We didn't talk much in the car. When she pulled up to the curb, she said, "This is going to be a difficult few months." I said I knew. She said, "You did the right thing." I didn't respond to that, not because I disagreed, but because it felt too small for what the evening had been. I went inside. Poppy was asleep on the couch in a pile of her cousin's stuffed animals. I sat beside her for a while in the dark. She stirred once, half awake, and said my name in that muzzy, sleepy way kids have. "I'm here," I said. She went back to sleep. The story broke 4 days later. It ran nationally by the afternoon of the 5th day. The CFO resigned before the week was out. The shell company was dissolved. A federal investigation was opened within 10 days. I know because I was interviewed twice, and both times I brought a folder of my own documentation that I'd kept copies of at home out of sheer professional habit. My supervisor was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I've heard he cooperated fully. I believe it. I think he'd been trying to find a way out of this for longer than he let on, and when he found one, when he found me, he took it. I was offered a transfer to another hospital in the system while things settled. I took it. My new unit is smaller. The commute is longer. The break room coffee is worse. I don't mind. Poppy still wears her rain boots when it isn't raining. She has an explanation for this that involves puddles being sneaky, and you have to be prepared. I've stopped arguing with the logic. Some nights I still think about that photograph, the timestamp. The fact that someone had watched her leave her school that morning and didn't know that by midnight the whole architecture of what they were protecting would begin to come down. I wasn't a whistleblower because I was brave. I wasn't brave. My hands were shaking when I sat in that storage unit. I was scared in a way I don't have a good word for, not for myself, but for her. For the gap in her teeth and the way she holds her backpack straps and the way she still sometimes calls for me in the night, even though she's 7 and mostly too old for it, she says. I was scared, but Poppy was at my sister's house, and there was a folding table in a storage unit on the east side of town, and there was a journalist with her glasses pushed up on her head who'd been waiting a long time for someone to show up. So I stayed. People ask me sometimes, not directly, but in the way they phrase other questions, whether I regret it, whether I wish I'd just put the envelope in my bag and gone home and let someone else figure it out. I understand why they ask. It would have been so easy to do nothing. I had a daughter to think about. I had a mortgage and a job I'd spent 11 years building. Doing nothing had a shape to it that I could picture clearly. Doing something did not. But here's what I've come to understand. Looking back at that night in a storage unit on the east side of town with a battery-powered lantern and a laptop full of things I couldn't unsee, the choice wasn't really between safe and unsee. The choice was between who I already was and who I would have to pretend to be if I walked away. I had filed those incident reports for 11 years. I had flagged billing irregularities that nobody followed up on. I had sat with patients who cried because they were afraid of what they'd owe, and I had told them it would be okay, and I had believed it because I had to believe it to keep doing the work. Every one of those actions was a small, quiet statement about what I thought was right. I hadn't been building a case. I'd just been trying to do my job with integrity, and then one day, the case came to me. That's how I think about cause and effect now, not as punishment or reward, but as consequence. The things we do consistently, the standards we hold ourselves to in the small moments when nobody's watching and nothing's at stake. Those things accumulate. They become a record. My supervisor chose me not because I was special or particularly courageous, but because I had been reliable in my honesty for so long that my own documentation corroborated what he needed corroborated. My integrity had made me useful in a way I never anticipated. That's not comforting in a simple way. It also means the opposite is true. The people who ran that billing scheme had accumulated their own record. Every small compromise, every memo approved without scrutiny, every meeting where someone raised a concern and was talked out of it, those things accumulated too. And eventually, they became a different kind of consequence. I'm not trying to make this into a lesson. I'm just saying that when I look at the full shape of what happened, nothing comes from nowhere. The journalist who answered on the second ring had spent years covering stories exactly like this one, building exactly the kind of sourcing that made her ready for that phone call. My supervisor had been quietly documenting for months, waiting for the right moment, the right person. I had been filing reports in good faith since before Poppy was born. None of us planned it, but all of us had been preparing for it in our own ways without knowing it. What I want to say, the thing I keep coming back to, is that the ordinary work matters. The careful work. The work you do at the end of a long shift when you're tired and nobody would notice if you cut a corner. The work of paying attention, of saying the accurate thing in the room even when it's uncomfortable, of keeping a record. Not because you expect to need it someday, but because accuracy is its own reason. Poppy still asks me sometimes what I did that night. She's old enough now to understand a version of it. I tell her that I found something that wasn't right, and I didn't look away from it. She thinks about that for a second. Then she usually moves on to something else, the way kids do. But I think she'll remember it. I think the things we do when it's hard to do them are the things that stay.